think that there is no one perfect way to do this. I've somehow taken in the idea that there is a perfect way to do this.
Everybody wants to be the best parent. Everybody wants to raise this perfect kid.
The hardest thing about parenting for me is knowing if I've given or done enough for them every day.
Am I pushing them too hard? Am I not pushing them hard enough?
I always feel like he deserves more than I can give him.
And, I wish I could be like home at 4 making a gourmet meal and we'd all sit down.
And it's difficult to look back and think, wow, I should have been there.
I worry that he's gonna grow out of me, that there's not gonna be time.
You're never gonna feel like you were doing it right because it's too important.
I just want them to know I'm really trying. I'm really, really trying,
She's like the best, and she like holds our family together.
No, I mean, he's like a great dad, not like so-so.
I hope to be half of the mom that she is because she set the standards really high.
I'm trying not to cry, honestly, because talking about her, when I say she's my heart, she means the world to me.
I'm the luckiest for a lot of reasons, but my parents being the top two.
She has a pure heart and cares about people.
I love you so much.
I think my dad is great.
Parents are feeling the pressure. All of us as parents, we feel guilty and we feel inadequate. And like you could see from those Kraft ads that became very popular, by the way, we all feel this way. Kraft has spent millions of dollars on market research, and they've really understood what we as parents feel as it relates to parenting. All of us feel guilt, false guilt and real guilt. Sometimes we beat ourselves up as parents for things that we actually can't control. But then there are other times that we feel guilty over things that we know that we could probably be doing better. So as parents, we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to try to improve the things that we can improve. Being perfect is impossible. And so like we heard in the video, what we need to strive for is being great. And I think that we can be great parents. And today in our Hard Talk, what we're going to look at is helping parents get on a path that leads toward being great parents. After a generation of parenting that really taught us parents to see children as equals and to let them make pretty much all of their own decisions, it appears that the pendulum is starting to swing back. A recent book that was put out by a psychologist and practitioner and also author named Dr. Leonard Sachs is really gaining a lot of traction. The book is called The Collapse of Parenting. And in this book, he talks about the fact that parents really need to take back authority that they've given away to their kids, that this is a really important thing. In his book, he actually argues that the rising levels that we see in kids, in obesity, in depression, in anxiety, that all of these things can be traced back to the fact that parents are basically abdicating their role as parents, that they're giving away that authority to their children. And the result is that these kids are growing up without standards of right or wrong, they're lacking discipline, and they just are looking to their friends and the internet for their answers and for the way that they should live their lives. And it's really, really not healthy for kids. And so Sachs is showing that parents really need to get to the point of taking back that authority, of reasserting their authority with their kids. And it's a concept that we really haven't seen in the mainstream for decades now. Here in Canada, Dr. Sachs's book became popular after Kathy Gooley, who writes for Maclean's Magazine, wrote an article in January of 2016 called The Collapse of Parenting, Why It's Time for Parents to Grow Up. Now, Kathy Gooley is not a conservative, she's not a Christian, but she really felt strongly and resonated with the things that Dr. Sachs was saying about parents, how they've really abdicated their authority. And so she wrote this article basically supporting his research. Well, the floodgates opened up in terms of response, positive and negative, in regard to her article. In fact, her article became the most read article in the history of Maclean's magazine.
Please don't yell at me.
No, you understand.
How come you're yelling at Mommy?
You understand.
Yeah, parenting is a tough gig, especially if you give all the power to your child. Some parents say that giving children options is empowering, but now many psychologists say it needs to stop. Maclean's magazine journalist Kathy Gooley wrote an article called The Collapse of Parenting, Why It's Time for Parents to Grow Up. She joins us now, and it has got, traction beyond. Everybody weighing in here. So what is it? What is causing this so-called collapse of parenting?
Yeah, it's a phenomenon that I think is familiar for a lot of people. Basically, a lot of modern parents today want to empower their child. And in an effort to do that, they're basically undermining their own authority. And so it's the struggle. How do you nurture your child and how do you govern your child? That's really what we're talking about.
So, and there's a number of aspects to this, but let me ask you about food in particular, and how that is one example of parents wanting democracy in the household.
Yeah. I call the dinner table ground zero for the collapse of parenting. And the idea comes from an American psychologist and family physician, Dr. Leonard Sachs, who writes in his most recent book about how a lot of times when parents start to relinquish authority, when they start to over-empower their children, it happens over food. Many parents will relate to the struggle to get your kid to eat veggies, to get your kid to eat anything, that might be different than what they say that they want. And then there's other things, subtle things that we do. I'm a parent, and I certainly have done this myself, where, wherever we go, we have a canteen of water or a sippy cup and a bunch of little goodies with us. And, really what that is symbolizing how, as parents, we want to satisfy our child, literally and figuratively. Even on just a 20-minute car ride, we bring along some food and some drink. Yeah,
because we want them to be happy.
Of course.
So tell me on the food front about trying to get these kids and the story of overhearing a parent and how that parent was trying to get that child in a restaurant to eat something.
Again, this comes from Dr. Sachs, but he was in a restaurant and he overheard a father basically pleading with his young daughter, honey, could you please just eat a few of your green peas? And to him, to most parents probably, you would have kind of overheard that.
Sure, I think I've done that, absolutely.
Exactly. And said, okay, well, that's fine, decent parenting, maybe even sophisticated, because you're kind of, giving the child a sense of autonomy. But this doctor heard that, and he said that perfectly embodies the collapse of parenting, because basically we're asking our child instead of telling our child that we have a certain expectation of them. And, again, you might say, oh, it's just a silly example, but what is the symbolism there? And, if you are giving your child authority over something that symbolizes nurturance, food, it's, how we are helping our child grow and thrive, that's where problems can arise. There's also an incredible Vancouver psychologist, Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who talks about how giving your child choice over things like what color pants would you like to wear is good and healthy. Of course, children should have choice in how they live, but what are the choices we're giving them? And food maybe is not a good place that we should be giving them a lot of choice, especially when the choice is healthy or not healthy.
Oh, and I've been there too. See that video? I've been there too. There's so much
We
to
all
this.
have.
It's just, that's only one aspect, but there's so much to the article and the research that you've done. Thank you.
Thank you
for sharing this morning.
So as you can see from this video, parenting trends, they come and they go. And that's why at Renew Church, we want to just go right back to the Bible and to dig out the timeless wisdom that's there, time-tested wisdom for parenting. And so that's what we're doing here today. You might be surprised that the Bible doesn't actually give a lot of specifics when it comes to parenting, but it does give just a handful of really solid principles that we can use. And by latching onto these principles, we can really move from there into some of the details of parenting, and it will keep us on the right track. So let me share those with you quickly today. First of all, the first principle we need to kind of arrive at is that children are born sinful. Okay? I hate to break the news, but we're born sinful. King David said it the best. He said, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me." A lot of parents have kind of latched onto the blank slate philosophy. And in fairness to them, this is a philosophy that's been around for a long time, all the way back to the time of Aristotle and the great philosophers. This has been discussed and debated. You know, John Locke, the great English philosopher in the 1600s, believed in this concept that, you know, really children were born with a blank slate, and that, you know, all of this data and so on was all just from their experience, and that was really what, you know, influenced their life and their decisions. But every parent knows that a child will fight, will steal, will lie without being taught anything. And, you know, experience tells us something different when it comes to children. The Bible says that we're born sinful, that sin was passed down to us from our ancestors, Adam and Eve. It's in our bloodline, if you will. As it says in Proverbs chapter 22, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. So this is the first principle that the Bible teaches, and we really need to come to agreement on that before we can move on to the next ones. It's very important. The second principle is that parents have the God-given authority over their children. God gave authority to men and women over His creation, and part of that was over their own children as well. That authority does not belong to the state. It doesn't belong to your child's school. It doesn't belong to their kindergarten. It belongs to you, the parents of that child. The husband-wife relationship is the foundational relationship of the family, right? A family exists with a husband and wife. Children are a bonus, and they're added to that, you know, dynamic, but it's really the husband and wife relationship that's the foundation for the family. And parents are responsible for leading and teaching their children. We see that all the way back in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that we're to be teaching them all of the time throughout the day. Children are responsible, on the other hand, for obeying their parents. That's really what Scripture shows us. In Colossians chapter 3, it says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." So the child's job is really quite simple. It's just to do what you're told. And, you know, that's really by design when you think about the fact that children are born without, you know, their intellect fully formed. They're born without information. They're born without experience. And it's really quite, you know, crazy when you think about how much parents today will give authority to children that really have no equipment whatsoever for managing their life. So that's why this authority is given to us as parents. Now, this authority that God's given us is not to be abused. Whenever God gives authority, He gives it to the authority to benefit the person who's under authority. You see that principle all throughout Scripture for every type of authority, whether it's government or in our families or whatever. So we are not a democracy in our families. Don't treat your family as a democracy, the Bible says. You have authority over your children, and you make good decisions for them to benefit them. We need to make those choices for them when they're little, and as they grow up, we involve them in the decision-making process, and as they get older, they take that on as they develop and gain wisdom and experience. The third principle is that parents, especially fathers, are responsible for disciplining their children. In Proverbs 29, it says, "Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights that you desire." Now, understand, disciplining your children does not mean beating them whenever they get out of line. It may involve spanking, properly done from time to time, mostly when they're very young, preschool kind of age. But discipline is so much bigger than that. Discipline, really, when you think about it, discipline is the transference of self-control. It's taking the self-control that we have as adults and it's transferring that to a child so that they can get to the place where they are in control of themselves. In Proverbs chapter 25, there's a great metaphor for this. It says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." You know, in ancient times, cities were protected by walls. They built these walls around the cities to protect them from invading forces that would come in that would want to take over the city. And that metaphor is so perfect for children. You know, children without self-control, they lack protection, right? They're vulnerable to all of the temptations and the trials that are going to come at them in life, and they're not going to be able to stand up. They're going to be totally overwhelmed and overtaken by these things unless they develop self-control. So discipline is transferring self-control to them. Discipline brings cause and effect consequences, which are negative and also positive, into the life of the child so that they can, over time, start to make good decisions. You see, their sinful nature is going to lead them to make bad decisions, but with these consequences that we bring into their life, this discipline, they will learn to make good decisions over time. Now, I'm telling you, this is a time-consuming and very tiring process. It is not for the faint-hearted, okay? So parents, you need to understand this is difficult. But for the parent that does it well, you will definitely enjoy the fruit of your labor when you see your children gaining that self-discipline. The fourth principle is that rebellion is extremely serious and it has to be treated harshly when it comes to our kids. As we already learned, parents have the God-ordained authority over their children. And so to rebel against your parent, kids, it's really to rebel against God because God placed them as your authority. This has been considered extremely serious throughout most of the world, throughout most of history. In fact, apart from here in the West in the last 100 years or so, rebellion against parents has been considered extremely, extremely detrimental to society. In fact, in the Old Testament, parents had judicial authority over their children. You may be surprised, but under the law of Moses, rebellion against one's parents was actually, in extreme cases, punishable by death. Now, people hear this today when they hear the Bible, and they think this is completely absurd. This is like so barbaric. Now, I'll actually read the passage for you, just so you hear it. Deuteronomy chapter 21, it says, "If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother, and who will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders of the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard.' Then all the men from his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and be afraid." That's hardcore. And I can understand how people, when they first hear that, would be like totally taken back. Whoa, that is like barbaric. Who would ever do that? This is actually a topic that's often used to make the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, look absurd, ridiculous, and so on. But I want to fill you in with a few notes. First of all, this command was not arbitrary. This was something that it's not something parents would ever do just on a whim. It was not for minor offenses. The text here says that it was for outright, ongoing rebellion of a son. If you go back and study, this is for a son that was, now of the age of maturity, becoming a teenager. Plus, it says that parents, if they had these claims, would have to take the child to the elders of their community. It wasn't something that they would just enact on their own. It would be similar today to a parent that would turn their child over to the cops, say if they knew that they had committed a crime. Now, in fairness, we might do that, not thinking that the cop is going to kill our children, so obviously not the same level. But here's the important thing. This rule was designed to preserve the nation. It was designed to explain how seriously God took this matter of rebellion. And you should notice that the Bible actually never records this law ever being enacted. And I've done study in terms of Jewish history. There are no records in Jewish history either of this ever being enacted. In other words, when you look at it, it was kind of like, for those of us that are maybe a bit older, it was kind of like the strap that hung on the wall of the principal's office at school. It was there. It was never used, but when you went to the principal's office and you looked up at it, they would tell stories and you would go, oh, right? This is kind of the purpose of this law. People in the West today think it's really archaic for a parent to even threaten their child with any kind of, physical threat. And yet those same children will often grow up to commit murder, rape, robbery, manslaughter, just go out and drive drunk and kill somebody, ending or ruining other people's lives. We used the term, or we used to use the term, the fear of God as being something that we had to instill into the heart of a child so that they would stay away from things that are so destructive. And so understand, this rule of stoning children was probably, very likely, never ever used. But its purpose was to communicate just how seriously God takes rebellion. So that's the fourth thing. Fifth is that parents need to balance discipline with relationship. It's important that we not frustrate our kids, especially us dads. We've been charged primarily with that discipline aspect, but because somehow God sees that we're somehow equipped in that way, but we also have this weakness where we can frustrate, exasperate, discourage our kids. In Ephesians 6, it says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." And in Colossians chapter 3, it says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged." And so, dads, we have this possibility. I recognize it myself. I've seen it in my parenting over the years. We need to learn to be nurturing, just as nurturing as we are enforcing and keeping that balance. You know, we've always said that rules without relationship, what's the formula? It equals rebellion, always. Kids are going to rebel if you don't have a real relationship with them. I like to use that analogy of a bank account. You know, your relationship with your child is like a bank account, and you need to be making investments constantly into that account, because over time, there are going to be times when you need to discipline them, and discipline's never fun. You're always going to have to do something that, you know, is hard for the child to accept, and that's going to be a withdrawal. And to make those withdrawals, you need to make sure you've invested enough, and you have enough in that bank account that it can cover the withdrawal that needs to be made. So that's a good thing to remember. That just takes a lot of time and investment. Sixth and last, the last principle is that the goal is to have children who honor their parents. You know, we forget that one of the 10 Commandments is actually directly, specifically given to children. In Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, we read the 5th commandment. It says, "Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." That's directed straight at kids, at children. You know, God wants children to move from rebellion all the way to honor. So think about this progression. You have like rebellion on one side. We talked about that. You know, a slight improvement to that might be disobedience, right? It's not quite as bad as rebellion. From there, it might be reluctant obedience. Then you move to willing obedience. But then, even better than willing obedience is way out here on the end, and this is the goal. It's honor. It's that children would honor their mother and their father. You know, to honor is to actively look to bring blessing and joy to someone else. Now, some of you, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wow, I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that to happen with my kid. I would be really happy with reluctant obedience right now, and I get that. But that's the goal. The goal is to get out there to that level of honoring your parents, and that's what God's looking for. But how do you get a child who's born sinful and selfish to get to the point of wanting to bring joy and pride to their parents? That's a big question. And I can tell you, it's not a quick journey. It starts early with following these guidelines that we're looking at here today, and then it's just a matter of adding to that skeleton over time. We're going to move into an interview for the rest of our time here. I've asked my family to come, and I'm going to be interviewing them today, my wife and my 4 kids. And in that interview, our goal is just to kind of pull back the covers a little bit on some of the things that we've experienced as a family. My wife and I have been married for almost 25 years. We've been parents for most of that time. And our kids are certainly not perfect, and we are not perfect parents. We've made lots of mistakes. Our kids have made mistakes. But we're working at it. We're learning through things. And to this point in our life, all of our kids are following God, which is awesome, which is great. And so we just want to kind of, you know, pull back the covers and let you see a little bit of the discussion that we have as a family, and maybe that'll benefit you today. Today, our Hard Talk is about parenting, and rather than just deliver a message, as I often do by myself, I thought that we would do things a little bit differently today and interview some people that are close to me. I've often mentioned in relation to parenting at Renew Church that I give pretty much all of the credit to our family to my wife, Sarah, who is here today, who I think is a great parent and has done a lot of great things in our family and helped me a lot. So I wanted to make sure that she was here. And then I thought, you know what, why not bring the kids in and kind of get their perspective as well today? I think sometimes that our kids have more insight into parenting than we may give them credit for. Although none of them are parents, probably they all will be at some point someday, and they're going to take the things that they've learned up to this point in their life and more to be part of their parenting. So we're going to ask some perspective from these guys as well today. Let's start with some introductions. First of all, here to my right is my wife, Sarah, who's been my partner for almost 25 years now. My partner in crime raising these kids to the point that they're at so far. So I'm glad that she's here with us today. And then also I'll have my kids just introduce themselves.
I am Maggie, and I'm 22. I am married, and I am working right now at Fight for Freedom, which is an anti-human trafficking organization in Toronto.
Very good.
I'm Emma. I'm in the 12th grade, and I'm moving to British Columbia next year to go to college.
Very good.
And I'm Jacob. I'm in college right now for interaction design.
Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm in grade 8, and I'm 13 years old.
Very good. Going into high school next year. So, my first question that I'm going to ask is for everyone, anyone that wants to respond. Okay, so make sure you have a mic. Dr. Leonard Sachs says that parents today need to take back authority, that this is a generational thing where we have to all just start taking back authority. And I want to ask the question, how does a parent do that? How does a parent take back authority? And there's probably two ways you could look at it. In general, how do parents start taking back authority? And then maybe we'll ask a second question of how does a parent that's maybe not taken authority for a certain period of time then start to do it? But we'll save that. But in general, how do parents take back authority?
So I think that if a parent has to get to the point where they're trying to take back authority, it might be too late. I think probably starting at a young age and establishing some sort of authority is probably the way to go.
I definitely think that if you're not establishing authority as your child is young, you're not going to gain that trust with them or have the guts to actually put the authority on them. So starting young would definitely be something that I think we can all say would work.
That's important. How do you do that really young? What does that look like, establishing that authority?
Discipline.
Okay.
Positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement.
Okay, so both positives and negatives. What about winning battles when you're having these clashes as parents?
Well, I remember you guys always said, even if you were wrong, you were right. So knowing that you guys were right and that your say was the most important, that we couldn't really talk back to you guys.
At a very young age.
Yes.
It's just our way or the highway kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I remember that. Sarah, why is establishing authority early so important? And what are some of the ways that parents kind of give away that authority without maybe wanting to, but they're actually giving it away?
I think for me, like even when we had Maggie, we didn't even have access to any parenting classes. We didn't really read books back then or anything like that. But I think I knew one thing is that I couldn't go back on the time if I didn't make the good decision as far as parenting. So I think we were on the same page, and we had discussed things that we wanted to see in our family and that we wanted to establish as far as authority with the kids.
Okay. So how are some ways that you see today that parents give away that authority?
A lot of ways.
Okay. Give a couple examples.
I think that kids are given way too much freedom, even from when they're little, as far as what they want to eat, what they don't want to eat, if they don't want to sleep. I feel like kids nowadays are in control of what they want, and if they don't want to do something, that the parent just allows them to take control that way.
Okay.
So I think that early on, there's some things that I really knew I wanted. I wanted the kids to have good sleep patterns, that they wanted them to have good eating habits. And we just established those things that even though it would be a battle, I knew I was going to win.
Yeah. Because they're kids, right? They're little children. They don't know what's good for them, right? And we have to, provide that for them. Okay, good. Let me direct this to the kids then. Guys, do you remember, how did we establish our authority with you guys early on? Like preschool, really young. Do you remember?
Spankings.
Spankings?
To go with that, it definitely started not just the spanking, but like a light discipline, like you've said in some of your messages. Light discipline, and then if we kept going on with that action, give us a little more discipline, and then later on it got to that point of, okay, this is the spanking, but you'd always reassure us after the spanking that you loved us and you were doing it because you loved us, and you'd always pray with us after. So I'd say that showing that what you're doing is out of love and out of like God's eyes, I'd say.
Okay. So it was kind of an escalating scale. It would kind of start maybe with a slap on the hand and maybe escalate from there. So that's establishing authority early on. How did that kind of change as you got older? you know? Because I think, honestly, I don't think any of you probably had spankings beyond, you're going to argue with me here, but beyond 5 years old.
Yes, we all did, but Jill.
Did you? Maybe one or two. Maybe one or two well-placed ones after that, but okay.
Joe hasn't had his first.
Joe hasn't had it. I will confess, he hasn't had any yet, so we've kind of...
Little taps, little.
All right. So as you got older, how did that kind of change? How did we establish the authority as you got a bit older?
I think the same guideline applied, that, you know, you're still our parents, you're still right, and you know what's best for us, even if, you know, we're 13, 15, whatever, like you guys have had more experience, so we were told to trust you guys and to, you know, follow your wisdom and whatnot. But I also think that probably getting into like high school and stuff like that, you probably establish your authority through just like leading by good example, and having expectations for us that you guys, you know, lived out for yourself. So, I mean, it's like practicing what you preach, essentially.
Okay. I think it's important that parents recognize that the reasoning ability of a child is non-existent when they're starting, and as they grow and mature and their brains develop, they're able to start to reason. So we start adding reasoning as we get older, right? But a young child doesn't have that ability. They don't know what's good for them, and so on. So, good. Okay, Sarah, I've got a question here for you. You believe, we talk about this a lot, you believe that most parents are too passive when it comes to their kids. Just knowing what they're doing and, you know, being aware of their child's world and what's going on in their kid's world. Talk to me about that a little bit.
I think that parents are scared. So I think that's how I view a lot of parents, that they're scared to damage their children emotionally by being the bad guy or laying the rules and boundaries, that they're scared that they will lose that relationship with their child.
Okay. So kind of a fear of conflict even?
Well, I think that they're scared of conflicts because they don't know where they're going with the conflict. So I think that if you know a little bit where you're heading and where you want to take that conflict, that you're not going to be scared to engage in it.
Now, I'm sure you've felt that before as a parent. How do you overcome it?
I think that that's kind of like the foundation of your parenting. So I think you have to refer to what you want to see your kids, where you want to see your kids go, and you have to refer to that. So even if it's hard, that it's a reference point to, I don't know.
So looking at the greater good for your kid and out of love, just pushing through that fear.
Yeah, and where there's going to be times that your kids don't like you, or that you might see them more if you're stopping them from hanging out with a certain group of people, that it might require for you to be more engaged even in their lives, to take them through that part, that battle. And I think sometimes parents are just scared to do that. So.
Okay. What do you think parents are actually communicating to their kids when they kind of play more on the avoidance side of things, that, you know, when they don't engage? What do you think that communicates?
That they're not in control.
Okay.
Yeah, probably.
All right. Do you think it communicates anything in regard to the parent's love for the child? Not that that's true, but that the kids could interpret it that way?
Well, I think kids isolate, and then we think that they want isolation, and that we give them that privilege of being isolated, but that's not what they want. So it probably does communicate to them that you don't love them or want to engage in what they're going through.
Okay. Guys, let me direct it to you. The response that many parents would give in regard to that whole thing of really engaging and kind of sticking their nose into their kids' world, that they're afraid that would drive their child away if they're too invasive. And so let me ask you guys this. Do you think that that's a legitimate fear? Did us sticking our nose into things ever kind of start to drive you guys away, and how did you manage that?
Well, I think that being invasive with no like loving intention, or an intention to actually communicate what's going on in your child's life or whatnot, is just being invasive, which is never like a welcoming thing. So I think that drives away children. But I think that if you have like an intention to see deeper into your child's life and what they're going through, with an intention to be loving and an intention to be interested and want to like lead them, and obviously a godly intention, then I think that children are most likely understanding of that.
Okay.
And to add, I think that if parents are not just being invasive when something bad happens to their kid, or when they're assuming that something's going wrong in their kid's life, they're being invasive at every point, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
how their day's going every day.
Involved.
Yeah, involved.
Yeah.
So it's not even invasive, but knowing about your kid, knowing what's happening with their day. And
Right. So it's not just looking for the things that they're doing wrong, it's showing real
Yeah.
interest in every part of their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is for Sarah.
Oh.
Being involved in your child's world obviously takes a lot of time. So if parents are only seeing their kids like 10 minutes a day when they're driving them to school, and the kid's like on their iPhone half of that time, they're really not getting a lot of connection time. There's no chance to kind of get to the deeper conversations. So I think a lot of parents struggle with this in our really busy world. So how do we find that time, that relational time? And when we do get it, how do we kind of break the ice to get to stuff that's meaningful? You know what I'm saying? Not just surface conversation.
Okay, that's a great question, Pastor Bartley.
It is good.
We're going to have to repeat it.
So how do you find the time for those deeper conversations? And when you get the time, which is never as much as you want probably, how do you break the ice and get to the meaningful
I
stuff?
think for me, I don't think when we started having kids, I don't think I realized how hard and long hours it would require. I think that when they're little, it's really physically draining. But I think the older they got, I didn't realize that you had to have those conversations at night. And if you want to watch his show, you had to not watch his show. You had to bring them into your space constantly. That might be because of how I grew up. My parents were great, but we were in our room by 9, and I thought that's the way it was going to be. But I realized that often kids are willing to talk at night when you're not willing to talk.
Okay.
So I think that when you start realizing that and you anticipate it, you're going to welcome it more joyfully and know that it's going to be like, you're going to get rewards from those conversations.
Yeah. And you still do that. We'll be watching something, and now because the kids are older, they tend to come home later, and you'll be like, hit pause, we're going to have a conversation here. And I'm usually the one that's like, really? I'm sure they're fine, right? But you do persevere in that, which is a good thing.
quite often.
Quite often? Yeah.
Last night.
Is that true? Like, is nighttime kind of the time when you guys
Especially
prefer?
at 12 o'clock when you're sleeping, sometimes she'll just come in and open your door, close your door, open your door until
Oh, that
you
she'll
wake
do
up.
that with you?
Yes.
Yes.
Or when you're taking a shower.
Oh, okay.
She'll come inside and just hang out and talk to you.
I think that when you know, even if you're driving them to school and you have a couple minutes with them and you know something's not right, I think the important thing is to follow up. So to find a time at some point during the day.
I know sometimes you guys complain about how much your mother is sort of like persistent and kind of in your face about some of those things, right? And even like talking to you in the shower at 12 o'clock at night. But do you ever think about how that would be different? Like how maybe other kids' parents maybe are super passive, and what a difference that would create in your life?
Well, I definitely think it makes us a lot more comfortable, I guess, because it's not like every time we have to talk, we have to sit down at dinner, having this fancy meal talking. It can happen whenever.
Whenever we have tried that, it's been a disaster,
Yes.
right? You guys remember what it would be like when we would try to have devotions?
Yeah.
It was like, honestly, I would lose my mind every time. We couldn't get them to just be quiet like for 10 minutes. So.
She was the one who started it.
And she was just as bad. Yes, it's true. So we're much more probably way of life parenters. So when the moment is right, taking the time to pray with you about something or have a discussion when it's at the right moment, is that generally a better procedure? Yeah.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah, a lot of parents focus only on changing bad behavior. This is kind of typical for parents, right? We see something we don't like and we want that to stop because it makes our life better, predominantly. Why is that insufficient just to parent bad behavior? And what advice would you give parents?
I think for me that was always a very, very important thing because of how my parents raised me. So I felt like I really could see my parents' hearts through if I was acting up or if I was doing things that they didn't agree with. They were probably not sometimes as strict as they could have been, but just seeing their heart and that I knew deep down, I trusted them. So I think that for me, establishing a trust with my kids that we're going to live the way we're going to ask them to live is big, because they're going to know that we've had positive results from following God and from being obedient. So I wanted them to know that I'm not just requiring these behaviors just so that they can look good in public or whatever, but because the outcome would benefit them later on to have God bless them and to live a life, that they enjoyed. God's.
Ultimately, right? If they're only conforming on the outer surface, and it hasn't gotten to their heart, you have to ask what's going to happen when they're out on their own, right? When you're not there enforcing rules and stuff anymore.
I wanted them to have a relationship with Jesus, and that, like Jacob was saying, that if we're not there, he's not looking just to be sneaky. He just knows that God's with him, and he's not disappointing me, he's disappointing God. So that was always bigger than seeing their obedience in front of me, because I knew that they would turn around and be disobedient. Often.
All right, kids. Probably every parent that's tuning into this today hopes that their child will follow Jesus someday, okay? Unless they just haven't figured that out yet. But most people that are coming to Renew Church, that's what they want. They want their kids to follow Jesus. No parent obviously can guarantee that will happen. We wish that we could. We can't guarantee anything. But what can parents do to improve their chances? And this series is called Hard Talks. So I want you guys to give some hard lessons and truth, or speak to the parents kind of directly. What are some things that they just have to do to give themselves the best chance that their kid will keep following Jesus?
Okay, so I definitely think that, because you said hard truth, if the parents aren't living their lives through Christ, your kid is most likely not going to, unless they have a firm foundation they've created on their own. Because a lot of the times I feel like whether the kid wants to admit it or not, they're going to look up to their parents for advice or for a path. And if the parent is saying, yes, go to youth group, but then they're living a side life, the kid is going to be like, okay, well, I guess I can do that too, and it's accepted by God,
What do you mean side life? How would you define that?
Well, saying things like, okay, well, don't talk back to your brother, or treat your brother kindly, but then they're not being forgiven. They're not being forgiving to either the child or to the wife or husband or whatever. So I definitely think that.
So they're not practicing what they preach.
Yeah.
Right. So they maybe will tell them to go to youth group, but they're not really committed to being in a Renew group or coming to church.
Make sure you're on time or read your Bible. But when was the last time they read their Bible themselves? Or
Good. Very good. Okay. Any other hard advice for getting parents to?
I'm ready.
Okay, you're good. Let's hear it.
I would say do not be a pushover. I think I've seen it a lot through youth ministry, is that parents will let their kid parent them, and they'll say, oh, you know what, my kid is not feeling like going to church, so I'm gonna just let them stay home. And they'll let their kids stay home by themselves. Or they'll be like, oh, they don't feel like doing this today, or they're too shy. That's the one I hear a lot, and it's annoying, because I think that sometimes kids need to be pushed out of their comfort zone and being, especially even at that age, it is awkward and it's hard, but a lot of change and, a lot of your relationship from God comes with having a relationship with other people. Right. And so, it's a lot more than just telling, your child to come to church, whatever, but not being a pushover, setting your foot down on it.
Do you think some of that connects right back to the time when they're 3 years old and don't want to eat their broccoli?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. It kind of, you think 100 years ago, kids were going to church, it wasn't even optional, and they weren't allowed to breathe on the way to church or at church, right? So now it's it's gone from that to all these options on how kids feel, or if they're not getting anything out of youth group. And I remember a lot of times, one, Emma being really upset about the situation of youth, and she couldn't connect. And I was like, well, then you need to serve, or you need to find somebody that you can help. And it was always like, instead of agreeing with them that they weren't getting everything that they needed out of it, that wasn't the purpose of church or of youth group, that they were there to also give to people, to find that person that couldn't connect with anyone, and to change their perspective of selfishness to be always looking to serve others, you know?
Good. That's good. Thank you guys very much. You know, let me just kind of wrap it up. We started the day by talking about the need for parents to take back authority. And that's such a big concept. And I really want to make it clear that, you know, when we take back authority, that's really not the end of the story. That it's really about transferring that authority from us to God, right? You're trying to get the child to follow you, and then somewhere in the process, you're like, okay, now you're not following me, you're following God. I remember from the time that I was, you know, from the time you guys were young, I would try to help you explain to you that, you know, when I'm giving you a rule for something, it's really not my rule, right? It's God's rule, and I'm actually following the rules too, as best that I can. And I think you guys would see a lot of times that it was hard for me too to submit myself to God, that there was a struggle sometimes when I wanted to do a certain thing that maybe wasn't right or healthy. So it's that transferring and getting your child to the point where they're following God, not just following you. I know when, Maggie, when you got to the point of leaving and going, you know, to get married and start your own family, I felt confident because I really felt like the transfer had been made. And there's lots of things that you still need to learn and grow in and whatever, but the thing that we, I think, looked at as parents was, has the transfer been made? Has that stuff gotten into her heart? And can she now go off and start a family because she's taken that ownership and that authority's been transferred? So, and I think we felt that, right? You know, at the point where you stepped off. So I would just ask parents, you know, think about this. Does your child see you submitting to God, right? That's really what it comes down to. Does your child know that you're under God's authority and that you're following Him and that you're making sacrifices? And if they do, if they see that, I really believe that most times your child is going to follow in that path, and they're going to see you doing the hard things, and they're going to follow that example when they see the fruit from your life. So thank you guys very much for this today, and we'll continue on in our series, Hard Talks.
I heard an illustration the other day where someone used a marble to represent every weekend they have with their kids from the time they're born till the time they leave their house. It came out to about 1,000 marbles. 1,000 marbles. It kind of sounds like a lot, but before you know it, those weekends start slipping away. For me, the hardest thing, the thing that really broke my heart, was realizing how many handfuls I've already thrown away. So much time wasted. And what do I have to show for it? Life is precious. And even though I've squandered a lot of my time, now I cherish each one of these marbles. I guess you can say that seeing how much time I waste has changed my perspective on what's important. Careers and hobbies are good things, but they certainly aren't the ultimate things I had made them before. I guess this life is all about perspective. And even though I know I can't spend every weekend with my family, I can certainly try. I can't believe before that I was so dedicated to the things that don't really matter. Me? I've got 728 marbles left. And I can't wait to enjoy each one.